Well, currently I'm an adjunct professor for Baylor Law School, but prior to that, for 30 years, I was a prosecutor with the Tarrant County DA's office. I mean, I think it's like anything else. I mean, the first one you don't do quite as well as the next two or three. For me, what worked over time was I had to basically prepare myself emotionally for those meetings. And the key for me was trying to keep my composure. I also made sure that after the meetings that I had a space of time where I could reorient myself and deal with the emotions. But there's really nothing to prepare you for it, and every victim's different. But just dealing with the emotional side of it, it just comes with time, and it comes down to knowing yourself and what you can handle.
You have to remember what your job is. And as a defense attorney, your job is to make sure that the rules are followed and that the person that you represent has the best defense possible. And so as a defense attorney, I would say it's easier to compartmentalize that stuff and put it in a different place. It is harder as a prosecutor when you have the burden of proof. I've done both, so I definitely, I think it's easier to take it home when you're representing the state and you've got a victim and real life people. When you're on the side of the defendant, you have to find something that you embrace about your client and keep your representation about making sure you protect that individual person and not so much hung up on the grisly facts.
And I think the way you deal with it is first you recognize that you're a professional that has a job to do, to recognize that you've got this privilege of taking this moment in a broken world to try and heal it and to do it with the utmost professionalism that you have. But you also have to remember that that's just your job, and it is not the life that you take home.
The effect on crime victims, the effect on the community. I remember I'll tell you a quick story as an example. Several years ago, I tried a case where a drunk driver killed a mom and a child, and a couple of days after the crash, we walked into the child's school and saw that students in the school had completely covered the walls of the entire school with big posters and messages that they wrote to this child who had been killed for absolutely no reason. And it was at that moment, standing in that school and seeing that, that I realized how much crime, and in particular violent crime, affects people far beyond those whose names are in the police report, for example, that can affect entire communities. And so you keep that in mind when you're prosecuting particularly violent crime.
Well, I have to hark back on what my father told me at a young age, and that is to keep moving along and keep your eye on the prize, so to speak. There are a lot of times in which you feel a bit depressed, if you will, not necessarily in the clinical sense, but from what you see each and every day. But you also have to keep focused on what your job is and what your duty is to your client. And that helps me to stay focused, be polished, and be able to move forward.
So the emotion on the side of the defense usually comes from a client that is in a situation that their liberty is at stake. So when you represent a client and you really believe that they're factually innocent, those are the more difficult emotional cases versus when you're like a prosecutor and you're dealing with a victim that you're trying to get justice for. And I think that one of the hardest things when you're dealing with those cases is to keep a reality in your mind of what the consequences can be if I push this too far. If I push this to a trial, am I exposing my client to something that's worse than if we take a deal on something that they didn't do? And it's very difficult. So when I deal with that, I think a lot of it is just talking with people. I mentioned a court group. I have a group of defense lawyers. We go to lunch every Thursday, and to be able to just sit around the table and talk about a case and share ideas on how to handle it is huge. And I would hope that everyone, whether they're in a DA's office or a defense office, has the opportunity to create a core group of people that you trust.
Everybody needs to concentrate on their mental health. And for me, I love movies, so it was a way for me to escape. So if you're a movie watcher like me, get into those movies, take you out from where you are, but you have to remove yourself from the work. If you don't remove yourself from the work, then it's just going to be constantly on your mind when you sleep, when you're awake. And so I would just encourage you to take time for self-care.
Take a break. Nobody knows you better than you, and know your limits. And so when it is time to kind of step back, that you've hit that limit, take a break and make sure that your mental health is extremely important, and that needs to be number one priority.
Excellent. It is essential that you take breaks, and by that I mean my career has not been a straight line. I haven't stayed in the same office for 30 years. I've moved around as necessary. Within the office, I've asked to be transferred to different divisions to get a break from constant crushing workload and from these horrible facts and from things like that. So it's imperative that you take those breaks. It's imperative that you learned that your life at work is totally different than your life at home, and that you have to have a life outside of being a prosecutor. If that's family, if that's a hobby, if that is exercise, you have to have a life that is not your identity and prosecutor as the same, or your identity and defense counsel as one and the same. You have to have your own identity and your own life outside of work.
It's great work. You're dealing with people. The thing I would tell you, especially Baylor law students, by and far are advocacy ready because of the way Baylor teaches. Don't waste the gift. And what I mean by that is I mean that you've been given by your ability, by the good Lord, however you want to look at it, the ability to communicate. Very few lawyers can do that well in a courtroom. And this school exemplifies that and helps you even become better. Some of you come into school and you're just a natural communicator. Some of you aren't a natural communicator, but through the process you become one. And so do everything that you can to learn to storytell truthfully. Own the facts that are bad for you as a criminal defense lawyer. Never lie to a tribunal. Just don't lie. Own it when you mess up, because you will. We all do. And forgive yourself when you don't try the perfect case, because you never will. And so just take care of yourself and read about communication. Read about the ability to tell stories, because in effect that's what you're doing in a courtroom. You're taking facts and evidence and you're telling a story from your client's perspective, whether it be the state or whether it be a criminal defendant.
I think you should prosecute first. I see so many young people, or maybe 50-50, that want to prosecute versus want to go into criminal defense. And I think prosecution is a very good way to get into the courtroom, to read a lot of police reports, read a lot of cases, and see what the value of a case is. As a prosecutor, you have to learn how to put a case together. And as a defense attorney, you're concentrating on taking a case apart. But if you've never been in the responsibility of putting a case together and having that burden of beyond a reasonable doubt, I think for most people it's probably harder to learn to take it apart until you've learned to put it together.
I think, and I'm going to broaden it, if you want to be a trial lawyer, I would strongly recommend starting in a DA's office. If you want to be a criminal defense lawyer, I would strongly recommend starting in a DA's office. You get the experience, you get the repetition, you get the training, you get a lot of things that you'll need to be able to be effective and to truly serve, whether you're going to be a criminal defense lawyer or if at some point in time you decide I want to go and do civil trial work, you're going to be so much further ahead. I just think that is the way to go if you want to be in a courtroom.
The conversation. Tell me about your loved one. Speak of all that was unique and wonderful about the person ripped so abruptly, so completely from your life. Find the words to describe to me, and later to others, how a dream became a nightmare from which you can't awake. Tell me about your child. Share all that you miss about the life you brought into this world, stolen from you before its time. Speak to me of promises of a future, cut short by unspeakable circumstances, of the clothing and toys that fill a room, a shrine to what might have been. Bring a photograph, a captured moment, that reminds us of the hope and the happiness that is gone, the broken home that time has not rebuilt. Share a favorite story so that we might have a small glimpse of the child they were and the person they will never become. Tell me about your husband. Speak of your struggle to live the life you planned without the support and comfort of the one with whom you planned it. Paint a picture with words. Share a side of him that only you knew so that I might breathe life into the photos of the bloody and violent way his life ended. Speak of bills that go unpaid and debt that grows with no end in sight, as it takes all you have to get out of bed, to be a source of strength for the children he left behind. Tell me about your wife, the mother of your children, the other half of what made you whole. Tell me how your kids have adjusted to the empty space in the house that was once a home built by two, now sustained by you alone. Speak to me of the life you planned, the book that must now be rewritten, with a new ending that is so different than you had hoped and dreamed. Do this for me until it becomes too hard to continue, and then stop, and trust that I will fill the gaps and make real for a jury what this crime has taken from you. Then repeat it all in a courtroom while facing the one who put an end to that promise and broke your world. And know that it's okay to cry, but better to hold back the tears until you finish the story that only you can tell. And forgive me if I look away, as that's the only way I can listen and not be overwhelmed by all that you have told me. Do all this for me, and I promise to do all I can to get justice for you and your family. Do all this for me in the hope that this experience will bring you some level of closure. Do all this for me as I pray that God gives you comfort and the strength to continue. As I walk down the hall and out the door, only to return to the conference room to hold open the door for the next family with whom this conversation must begin again.